What's up everyone, DJ's here, and welcome back to the Choosing a CO series. This time we're going to be looking at Tier 1. Now what separates Tier 1 from the other tiers is the COs in Tier 1 are pretty straightforward in both playstyle and builds. The way they're used doesn't really vary that much like with lower tier COs like Sammy and Max, which focus on certain units like mechs and tanks respectively. Now that being said, in this tier, CO matchup is an important factor, and there can be like rock, paper, scissors outcomes where one CO has an obvious advantage versus another. So without further ado, let's look at the COs.
Oh yes, Tier 1. The one that has Mark, Javier, Sasha, and Von Bolt.
Let's start with my favorite, Hawk. Now, Hawk was one of my favorite COs in Advanced Wars 2 growing up, and I always thought he was way cooler villain than Sturm. Also, it's no secret that I love global damage. It's simple, consistent, and Hawk's super CO power, Black Storm, brings real satisfaction every time you pop it. That is, if you have the patience. Regarding Hawk's day-to-day power, the 10% firepower boost is nice, but not entirely noticeable or game-changing. With the Comm Tower, you do get guaranteed 2-hit KOs when you use 2 full HP tanks to attack an opposing tank on a property. The first hit hits a minimum roll of 46% damage to the tank, and the second hit hits a minimum roll of 54%. Exactly 100% added together, just barely a guaranteed 2-hit KO. The exact same calc goes for infantry as well. His anti-air with 1 Comm Tower also 1-hit KO opposing infantry on forests, which can assist in niche situations. I personally think it's less about the calcs and more about the little bits of damage adding up over the course of the match. With respect to CO powers, Hawk's weakness is the long time it takes to charge his powers. Typically, Hawk will have to weather a few CO powers when against most other COs other than Von Bolt and Sturm, before he can use his own super CO power. If Hawk can survive until that point, however, a well-timed Black Storm can provide a satisfying, game-ending blow. Sasha, also a Tier 1 CO, is a particularly pesky CO for Hawk, because her CO power is very effective at delaying or even completely denying Hawk the ability to use his own powers. I've had games where I couldn't even get off a normal power until around day 20 versus a well-played Sasha. I would go as far to say that Sasha is a counter CO to Hawk in Tier 1. Typically, due to how strong Hawk's superpower is, he's more on the stally side of the Tier 1 COs. Unless he's up against Sasha, who is also a stally CO, he might want to exert a little more pressure versus her, using his 10% firepower bonus. Hawk has pretty good matchups versus the other Tier 1 COs, Javier and Von Bolt, due to the fact that his superpower is flat out better than theirs, assuming the match reaches that point. Therefore, I prefer Hawk on larger maps, where Von Bolt and Javier are less viable. But it can be a toss-up if you're versus Sasha or not. Hawk is also strong on maps that have a Comm Tower, so he can achieve the guaranteed 2-hit KOs on enemy units on bases. He doesn't really care that much if the map has contested or uncontested properties, since he's such a versatile CO. One of the reasons why he's my favorite in this tier. Next up, we got Old Man Von Bolt, the safe pick of Tier 1, as all his units have plus 10 attack, plus 10 defense, with no real drawbacks, other than the fact that he does not have a normal CO power, and his charge for his super CO power is excruciatingly long, 10 whole stars, one more than Hawk's 9, and tied for the longest super CO powered charge in the game with Sturm. Due to this fact, Von Bolt prefers to end the game early using his day-to-day advantage, since his super CO power isn't nearly worth the cost. If the game drags on, other COs in the tier, like Hawk's, powers will only increase in strength, leaving Von Bolt in the dust. If you're versus Sasha, you probably won't even get your super CO power off the entire match, since it takes 10 whole stars and you don't even have a normal CO power to pop. Another thing about Von Bolt's superpower is, similar to Rachel's superpower, opponents can play around his superpower if he does manage to get it off, by massing units together far away from the front lines, so Von Bolt's superpower doesn't really even affect current battles. Therefore, Von Bolt likes smaller maps, where he can abuse his day-to-day power early and often, and doesn't need to worry about larger, overpowered superpowers like global damage. He has a decent matchup versus all the other Tier 1 COs, but he typically prefers smaller maps with limited bases, like 2 or less. as if he's versus Sasha, she can't spam more units using her extra funds as much with limited bases. If it's 3 or more bases, I tend to lean more towards Sasha since she can effectively block Von Bolt's superpower, and she also can pump out more units with her additional income. Von Bolt typically has a decent matchup versus Hawk, and I know some people might think that Hawk's 10% firepower bonus might cancel out Von Bolt's 10% firepower defense bonus. However, keep in mind the defense is actually better than offense in Advance Wars. As you see in these charts, 110% firepower versus 110% defense does less than average firepower versus average defense. This discrepancy gets bigger the higher the terrain where defense stacks. This is one reason why Sturm is so strong in the game and Grim is so weak. That all being said, Hawk's superpower is stronger, so the match is pretty equal. Personally, I prefer Hawk in this matchup with a larger map. Von Bolt vs Javier is another interesting matchup. Von Bolt has a net 10% firepower advantage over Javier, assuming each side has a tower. However, Javier actually has usable powers and superpowers, which can turn the tides in the early game. This is largely a toss-up, but largely depends on how safe the comm towers are on the map and how many there are. On maps where artillery and indirects are more viable, I lean more towards Javier since he has a defense boost versus indirects. Sasha, or Sasha, as the graphic apparently calls her, is another strong CO, and a CO that's really grown on me the more I've played this game. Her 10% increase in funds effectively nets her 10% more units on the map. Her biggest strength, of course, is her CO power, Market Crash, which negates many of her opponent's CO and Super CO powers. It reduces your opponent's CO power meter by 10% for every 5k in funds she has. So if you maintain about 20k funds on average, you'll knock down your opponent 40% of their power meter every time you use it. A lot of the time, Sasha should be able to pop her cop once about every 2 to 3 turns once fighting has begun. This can ruin COs that exclusively rely on their Super CO powers like Olaf, Andy, and Eagle. One important thing about Sasha's CO power: do not forget to use it before you make your units. Just about everyone's made the mistake before. You buy all your units, you have like 1 or 2k funds left, and then you realize you should have popped your CO power, and now that you pop it, it does nothing to your opponent's CO meter. So don't forget, pop it before you buy the units or it's completely useless. Another thing, her Super CO power is incredibly bad. Trust me, I've tried it. You don't need to try it yourself. It's just bad. It's not worth it. Just don't even touch that button. Another thing to keep in mind is that you cannot hold off your opponent's power gauge forever. Every time you pop a CO power in Advance Wars, either a superpower or a normal power, the charge time the next time to pop the power increases by 20% more. Pertaining to matchups, I used to think it was rock, paper, scissors with Hawk beating Von Bolt beating Sasha, and Sasha beating Hawk, but there's a lot more nuance, and it really depends on the map. Sasha likes maps where there are at least 3 bases, so she can take full advantage of her funds. And she also prefers maps with less contested properties because her units are weak by comparison to her other peers in Tier 1. So she's a little bit more on the stally side, and she'd prefer to build up a massive army with her income advantage. But she also made me be careful versus a Hawk player who may be able to charge their meter in 1 turn if they have enough units massed. Javier is the simplest of all the Tier 1 COs. It's all about towers, towers, towers. If there's no towers, he's Tier 4, maybe even below. With 1 tower, he's Tier 1. With 2 towers, he's broken. So, Javier is map dependent. Since we're talking about Tier 1, we'll assume that he has 1 tower. In this instance, Javier is not too different from Von Bolt, in that his strength is his day-to-day power, with that nice defense bonus. As mentioned earlier, his strength over Von Bolt is that he has a cheap CO power that he can pop early in a match that packs a strong punch. Unfortunately for Javier, his powers do not give him a movement gain in addition to the boosts, so he prefers to use it while locked up into a fight, which is easier to do on smaller maps. His CO power effectively gives him 30% firepower boost and 30% defense, while his Super CO power only gives him 40% increases on both during the superpower with 1 tower. So that makes his CO power in most scenarios a much better bang for the buck. I very rarely ever pop his Super CO power. In addition to smaller maps, Javier also likes maps where the tower is not contested. On maps like Verdun, for example, you can shut him down from getting a tower and ultimately make him a Tier 4 CO. So he prefers maps where either he starts off with a tower in his possession, or the tower is right near his base and the opponent has no chance of securing it. Alright everyone, that wraps it up for the Tier 1 COs. Hope you learned something new. Hope to see you around next time. Peace.